From Los Angeles. Right now we turn to Dominic Chu, CNBC Senior Markets Correspondent. Dom, thanks so much for the time. How surprising is this news on this Tuesday?
It's surprising for sure in a number of ways, only because there's been so much jawboning and talking about what the next steps were. We know that there have been moves with regard to reporting on where the lawsuit stands and everything else. But what it comes down to is if this is going to be one of these commercially viable entities going forward as a combined group, it is going to require resources. And what this has done, again, there's nothing hard and set about this. They have a memorandum of understanding, right? That they've set a path forward for this. The details still have to be worked out. But if this does come to fruition, what this does is create a super league, right? We talk about these things and things like football/soccer. Ted Lasso fans have kind of heard about it, in the last couple of seasons with regard to getting all the biggest players together to kind of create this massive worldwide league. Well, this is happening now if this is going to come to fruition. The interesting part about this is the Saudi investment that will go into this. This is going to be what could be seen as rocket fuel, jet fuel for the game of golf going forward. It does not come without controversy. There are folks out there who still believe that the Saudi investment and the Saudi participation in LIV was one of the main sticking points. But the money aspect of this whole thing really does change the paradigm, Damon, George, right, about professional golf, because what it means is that it's already been viewed as a for-profit entity. What this now does is it provides a real for-profit platform for the commercialization, and ultimately, this is going to be about benefiting players. So where there have been massive labor union initiatives in the past in major league sports in places like the NFL for football, professional baseball, hockey, and other places, you in essence have that now without having a true collective body, a collective bargaining agreement in place. What the LIV Golf phenomenon has done is change the paradigm for how things operate with professional golf. And if there are going to be billions more put into the capital, right, the capital allocation towards professional golf, that could mean a huge amount. The question does become, though, whether the fans will react positively to that. And that's going to be something we'll have to watch play out in the next couple of years.
Dom, you've been tracking this story since the beginning. I know we talked extensively about the formation of the LIV Golf League last summer. You mentioned the transition now to a for-profit entity. The NFL did that in 2015. Major League Baseball did that in 2007. When you look at the public investment funds investment into Formula One, is that a comparable template to what we may see going forward? And can you even project potential growth down the road for this new collective entity?
Well, it's interesting, George, that you bring that up, because people around the world view golf more akin, I think, in a certain connotation towards Formula One than they would towards something like professional football or baseball. It is, in many places, the game has become much more accessible to people over the course of the last several years, but it's still viewed in many parts of the world as being on the more elite status, right? That there's a certain income spectrum that it targets. We're trying to grow the game a little bit more now to make it more accessible. But Formula One is probably the ultimate, the highest echelon of elite sports. These cars cost millions of dollars to make, and they race around in elite venues around the world. If you do take that kind of Saudi Arabian money, or a huge amount of it, and then inject it into a platform that has already had a nice marketing construct to operate with, then you can potentially put it out there to a point where it does kind of get the same notoriety as Formula One. Now, what they're hoping is that it has more of a wide appeal than Formula One, because still at this point, it does, yes, reach millions of people, but it doesn't have that same kind of thing that say professional soccer does around the world. It's not to say that professional golf in any time in the next few years will reach the same kind of reach and amplitude that professional soccer does. But if you do have this kind of a scenario play out, where there is a lot more marketing and a lot more global reach and presence put out there, this could be a big propeller for the game of golf to certain parts. And by the way, I would note that in many of my conversations with LIV insiders, PGA Tour folks familiar with the matter, there has been an interesting point that was made by the LIV Golf side, in that many of the players who are enjoying the LIV Golf platform do so because of the team aspect. So if this does develop into a franchise type model in some way, shape, or form for professional golf, a la what's happening with LIV, then that could change the entire landscape. And by the way, many of these players on LIV basically have equity stakes in the teams that they participate in. So if this becomes about an equity ownership model, it does then change some of the economics for the players involved. And that might ultimately be the biggest impact this will have, is that players will want to participate more because of that team aspect and because of more of the financial gain that they could possibly have, guys.
Dom, Jimmy Dunn has been a longtime power broker in golf, member of Augusta National, Seminole, among other places. He has friendships both on the PGA Tour and LIV Golf as well. What role did he play in this merger in your mind?
No, I don't know. I don't know how Jimmy Dunn, plays into this whole factor. I mean, Jimmy Dunn's reputation precedes him. The interesting aspect about this is that you can't come to an agreement for a deal like this without a lot of folks getting involved and folks of influence. Jimmy Dunn may or may not be one of those folks that has a huge say in this. But what it comes down to is when the players that were leaving the PGA Tour to go to LIV Golf did so because they felt like there was a better lifestyle, it was a better financial situation for them, and everything else, they opened up at least a can. Opened up a can, not of worms necessarily, but maybe something a little less, morbid. This idea that you can have a balance for players to go out there and try to make as good of a living as they can, and do so while not having to stress themselves out with a crazy travel schedule over the course of any given season or year. If that is the case, then the appeal or the negotiations that happen for something like this could simply involve trying to come to terms with the fact that probably most players want a lot of the things that the LIV Golf players say that they got by switching over to LIV. The personalities involved would probably have to understand that no matter what side, if you want to call it that they were on, there were some positive aspects that could be taken from both sides of the equation. And I think ultimately, whether it was Jimmy Dunn, whether or not it was somebody else, whether or not there were actual power brokers out there trying to put together this kind of a deal, that it was because there were certain benefits that some players did want to see happen on the PGA Tour. And this just accelerated it. I mean, the tour was already trying to put together in place a schedule change, elevated events, and everything else to make things a little bit more palatable for their players. Now, that evolution would have eventually gotten much further, perhaps 2, 3, 5, 7, 10 seasons from now. And the LIV aspect really just kind of put an accelerator on it. And that's probably why the personalities involved kind of came to where they were, because they realized that these things were eventually going to happen, and they wanted to be on the right side of it.
Dom, this is Rich Lerner out at Hillcrest in California. This move, it appears, has legitimized Saudi investment in an American sports league. I understand the broader global reach that includes the DP World Tour, but this is a significant investment in a longstanding American sports league, the PGA Tour. To what extent do you think this will open the eyes of, say, the NBA, the NFL, Major League Baseball, to possible Saudi investment in their leagues?
It's a precedent setter for sure, Rich. And some of the reporting and some of the color that you've been giving on this story kind of bears this thing out. We've already gotten to a point in U.S. professional sports, MLS, Major League Soccer aside. If you look at, Major League Lacrosse, Major League Soccer, even to a certain extent now, aspects of the NBA, probably at some point in the future, the NHL, or maybe even the NFL, where you start seeing what we would see in Premier League soccer, right? When you see jerseys with NASCAR-like logos all over the place. This is something where if you open up the game to more marketing opportunities, it's the field of dreams aspect. If you build it, they will come. If you allow people to actually advertise or become advertising or marketing partners with some of these major league sports franchises and teams, it does open up a lot more money for not just the leagues themselves, but ultimately for the players. If that were to happen, this does in some ways create much more of that world feel, right? The players, LIV players are already seen, wearing their team logos in addition to everything else. PGA Tour players have been seen for years wearing multiple logos on their hats, on their shirts, on their bags, and everything else. If you do this, I think what it does is allows a precedent to be set for major league sports franchises overall to go and do this. Now, there is still a perhaps controversy about whether or not the Saudi money is something that people want to be involved with or not. But let's be honest, the ladies' game has been sponsored by Saudi for quite some time now. And Saudi Arabia, as a country, has not exactly been one that's been viewed as being positive towards women in general. So if the ladies' tour can get around that, it becomes an issue of whether or not you feel like the game of golf is better off with more reach and more aspects of it, of that money coming from the Middle East. If it is that case, then this is ultimately something that could be good for the game. There are still going to be folks out there who feel as though the human rights element and the Saudi side of things and the money is going to be somewhat controversial. Rich, you said it yourself, time kind of heals all wounds. So you kind of want to figure out what's going to happen down the line based upon how people could feel in the future. I would also say this, there are certain people out there, PXG founder Bob Parsons in that mix, who've been very outspoken about the fact that they don't like having the Saudi involvement and that they don't want to sponsor athletes that are on LIV because of the Saudi aspect of it. So this is still a very polarizing issue, and it's going to take not just months, but possibly years to reconcile. But this is going to be a first step. So at the very least, in the next several quarters, months, years, you're going to have definitive proof of how this kind of involvement will affect the game. And ultimately, that's what kind of policymakers, whether they're at the RNA, the USGA, the PGA of America, the PGA Tour, or elsewhere, are going to have to kind of figure out. They'll have real world case studies to deal from with regard to how this is going to happen in the future.
Dom, does this give Saudi Arabia deal flow, a seat at the table, as I've said before, but a lane to get to companies in the insurance space or the banking space or the media space, those companies that underpin, that sponsor PGA Tour events? Do they now have that seat at the table where they can get deal flow?
Rich, I don't think it's a seat at the table just yet. My feeling is that this is a knock on the door, not a seat at the table. There still remains a huge element of public perception, brand value, brand ripple effects if you decide to kind of go that route with regard to taking Saudi Arabian money. Saudi Arabia is a huge part of the world sports scene. It's not like their financial influence isn't felt in many places, many corners, many circles around the world. What this does do, though, is it gives at least an opening, a possibility, a conversation to be had with regard to how certain brands that are more focused on the U.S. market, U.S. consumer, are going to want to kind of get involved with that aspect of investment. There are folks out there, again, there are folks out there in America who feel very strongly that they don't like the Middle East involvement. And there are folks out there who believe that, this is a world economy, a world sports kind of, feel in the next several years, that it's inevitable that you'll have that kind of involvement. And by the way, the biggest companies in not just America, but Europe, but Asia, everywhere around the world are global in nature. They've gotten to be as big as they are because they realize that there is a multinational aspect to sports. And by the way, that's a good thing, because if there is that multinational, multicultural aspect to sports, it is something that can bring people together. And ultimately, what brands have to figure out is whether or not that kind of an association is going to play well with their customer base. Remember, we've had numerous studies over the last several years with regard to public policy or cultural policies that companies have taken that have either led to positive or negative results. There are some recent examples in the beverage alcohol business. Nike and other athletic brands have gone through that same process before. So brand and perception really matters. But what it does do, Rich, to answer your question, it begins the conversation about whether or not there is an aspect of this that can be more commercial for some of the more American, at least consumer-focused brands here, to see whether or not this is something that they want to be associated with on the longer-term basis.